So let's talk about triggers for a couple of minutes. This is the Cheerios mentions on Twitter over time. The number of people mentioning Cheerios throughout the course of the day. What do you see? Not rocket science. When people eat Cheerios, they're much more likely to talk about it. When we're doing something, that thing is top of mind and we share it with others. It moves to the right a little bit on the weekend. Why? Because we eat breakfast later on the weekend. When we're thinking about something, we're much more likely to talk about it. When we just come back from a nice walk, we're much more likely to talk about it. As time goes since we've walked, we're less likely to talk about it. But it's not just engaging a behavior that makes it triggered. There are other cues or other triggers as well. So if I said peanut butter and, you might say jelly. Or if I said rum and, let's see, you might say Coke. Peanut butter is like a little advertisement for jelly. It's almost like jelly should pay peanut butter a kickback for every time peanut butter advertises, right? Because even if jelly's not there, if peanut butter's there, we think about it. What's your peanut butter going to be? What's going to be that thing that reminds people of walking, even if you haven't advertised recently, even if you haven't put a message out there? What's that thing that's going to remind them, okay, every morning I wake up and I walk for work, or every day at lunch I do it, or every Tuesday I go walking? There's got to be a trigger in the environment to remind them to do so. That's why Michelob had that old slogan, weekends are made for Michelob. Wanted people to think about the beer when the weekend rolled around. Same with Corona. It's impossible to go on a beach vacation and never think about Corona, right? Because you're lying there on the beach and suddenly it pops to mind. It's not magic. It's a trigger. The beach reminds us of Corona because those two things are associated together. So when we think about peanut butter, think about when we think about triggers, think about what your peanut butter is. What's that thing that's going to remind people of you even when you're not there, right? Because if something is top of mind, it's going to be tip of tongue. There's a great example of this with Kit Kat. Right? So Kit Kat is a great candy bar. Lots of people like it, but sales were down. So they came out with a really simple campaign, Kit Kat and coffee. Right? Having a coffee break, have a Kit Kat. Think about coffee, think about Kit Kat. Kit Kat and coffee and Kit Kat, best friends forever. Why is coffee a really good trigger for Kit Kat? It's frequent, right? It comes up often. If you're Rebecca Black, don't come out with a song called Leap Day, right? Leap day, something, something, leap day could be a great song, but people aren't going to think about it very often. If you want them to engage in the behavior often, they got to think about it often. Weekends are made for Michelob was originally holidays are made for Michelob, but they moved it to the weekend because the weekend is more frequent. If you want people to do something every day, link it to a trigger that comes up every day. Link it to a trigger, link it to a peanut butter that's going to happen when you want that behavior to take place. Okay, so that's triggers. I don't have time today, unfortunately, to talk about emotion, but you can... I have never had that reaction before. Wow. I should take you with me. You got to come with me to my next gig. I really appreciate that. Wow. Such enthusiasm, you guys. This is great. Thank you. So you can read about it in the book. There's a whole chapter on it, which emotions increase sharing, which emotions decrease sharing. I'll give you a little spoiler. It's not just that positive increase and that negative decrease. There's actually lots of negative emotions like anger that actually increase sharing. So I'll let you read about them in the book. I will talk about public for a couple minutes. I've already talked a little bit about it already. And to do this, I want to use a very simple Apple example. This is what Apple's old laptop used to look like. And if you notice, the logo faced the user. And they did that because they wanted to make it easy for the user to use. You set it down on the table, the laptop faces you. You know if the logo faces you, it's ready to go. But what's the problem with that? It's upside down for everybody else. And that doesn't matter for you, because you know what laptop you bought, right? You spent thousands of dollars and weeks of your time doing it. You could care less if someone else buys the same laptop as you. But the laptop manufacturer actually cares a lot, because people tend to imitate one another. But you can only imitate something if you can see them doing it. Just like that bicycle in my office, right? If something's hard to see, it's hard to imitate. So Apple actually went ahead and flipped the logo because they realized if something is built to show, it's built to grow. We've all heard that phrase, monkey see, monkey do, but we can only do what other monkeys are doing if we can see what they're doing. So let's spend a couple minutes thinking about how to make things more public. And to do that, I want to introduce a very simple idea in psychology called social proof. The best way to think about it is imagine you're in a city that you don't know very well. You're going to try to figure out a place. You guys can use this image, right? It's walking, it's kids walking with parents, it's great. How are we going to pick a restaurant in a city we don't know very well? We're not going to use Yelp. We're not going to talk to the concierge. We're just going to walk around and find a place. But what place are we going to pick? Why crowded? Popular, which means it's good. Notice you use others as a signal of information. I don't know what the right thing to do is. Should I go to this place or that place? Let me look around to see what others are doing and imitate it. But you can only imitate it if you can see what they're doing. Right? If that front window is frosted, it's going to be really hard to see inside. Same thing with all sorts of behaviors. If people walk to work, I've noticed in DC, for example, people often walk to the metro, they wear their sneakers, and then when they get to work, they put their heels on. But the problem with that is if you don't see people walking in with sneakers, you might not think that anyone else is walking. Right? But if we can get people to walk in their sneakers, now more people realize people are walking, and they're more likely to do it themselves. What we need to do is make the private public. Make things that are hard to see easier to see. If lots of people are walking on the weekend, that's great, but then no one in their office is going to know about it. They've built now a lot of pedometers and other sorts of tools that let people keep track of how much they walk. How can we make that more public? How can we post that to websites or other places where people can see how much others are doing and compete on it, right? To see who can walk more and who's walked the most this week. I talk a lot about in the book about game mechanics, right? Ways we can engineer competitions to make people compete with others to be on top. Frequent flyer miles are a great example of this. Who cares about frequent flyer miles? You basically get nothing except the opportunity to put your bag on earlier. Yet people love to talk about how many they have and what status they have, because it's a competition. Anything can be a competition if we give people a public number to associate with it, right? The greatest example of this, one we can think about logos, but I'll skip that example. The greatest example, remember the portable CD player? Remember people used to have to run almost in place to listen to music? Because it would skip if you didn't. You had to make that big choice. Do I want to exercise or do I want to listen to music? But I can't do both at once, right? It was a dark time in the history of music. Notice what Apple did, though, right? They came out with digital music player, but people were uncertain. It cost $350. Is it worth doing? So they made their headphones white. Much easier to see, much easier to imitate. Now, if we're on the subway or on the plane, we see someone with white headphones. We go, wow, lots of other people are doing it. It must be worth me doing it as well, and it increased the chance it catches on. We need to make it more public how many other people are walking, because the more they can see it, the easier it is to imitate. So let me give you a couple examples of that. We haven't met before, most of us, but imagine we're at a party, and I walked up to you and I said, hey, did you know that Subway has 5 subs under 5 grams of fat? Newfound friend, did you know Subway 5 subs under 5 grams of fat? What would you do if someone walked up to you at a party and said that? You'd probably say something like, oh, that's really interesting. Hey, I left my phone right over there. I'll be back in just a couple minutes. And then I would never see you again, because no one wants to share information like that. Right? People don't want to be friends with someone who shares information like that. Right? It just doesn't happen. But people are very willing to share stories. This is the story of Jared. We've all heard it. Jared lost a bunch of weight by eating Subway sandwiches. Way overweight in college, picked his classes based on which ones had big seats rather than which ones were actually useful for him. Starts going on a Subway diet, Subway for lunch, Subway for dinner, every day for months on end. 6-inch for lunch, foot-long for dinner, cold cut trio, veggie sub, tuna sub, loses all this weight. I told you a very quick version of the story, but notice what you learned about Subway while I was telling you this story. What did you learn about the brand while I was telling you what seemed just like idle chatter? Subway has 5 sons. Subway has lots of healthy options. You can lose lots of weight doing it. Everything that's on that side of the screen is actually hidden inside that story. It's not just an engaging content, it's a Trojan horse story. It's a vessel or carrier that brings the information along for the ride. Please Don't Tell did a great job of that as well, right? Yes, it's funny, yes, it's engaging, but at the end of the day, you can't forget that they make a really tough blender. And so that's the key, right? Not just creating funny content, not just creating engaging content, but creating vessels or carriers that bring your message along for the ride. Let me show you just one more example of that, and then I'll wrap up. This is my favorite. It's called Panda Cheese. It's not cheese made from panda milk. That would be really remarkable. I'd love to see someone milk a panda. You'd have to wear a lot of padding and run very quickly. It's an Egyptian company called Panda that makes cheese. And watch a couple of their ads.
Thanks.
Can I make you a cheese sandwich? No, I'm not hungry. Never say no to panda. I'm going to show you a couple of these. Good morning, good morning. I got you panda cheese for breakfast. No thanks, I don't feel well. Never say no to panda. Daddy, why don't we get some panda cheese? Enough, that's too much already. Never say no to panda. And last but not least, one more. Daddy, why don't we get some panda? Get one. Get one more. Okay. So I'm gonna cut the end of this because I want to make sure we have enough time. But I just want to point out something about this. Sometimes we think about viral marketing and we say, we just got to do something funny and that's it, and it's just a waste of time, right? Notice this ad. It is very funny, but I challenge you to tell someone else about it and not mention the word panda, which is exactly the brand that they want you to remember. They didn't just create engaging content, they created a Trojan horse story that carries their message for the ride. And so when thinking about how to apply these 6 key steps we talked about today, think about the underlying psychology that drives people to share. When people look good, they're much more likely to pass something on. How can we make them look good by walking and by talking about walking? How can we trigger them, remind them to walk once a day, once a week, whatever it is? Finding our peanut butter. How can we use emotion? When we care, we share. How can we make it more public? If it's easier to see others doing, it's easier to imitate. Practical value, useful information, and finally wrapping it in a Trojan horse story. And I know you're going to hear a lot of useful information, lots of good talks today. So I want to give you 2 key takeaways to think about. First, figure out what that message is. You don't just want people to talk, you want them to say a certain thing. You want them to engage in a certain behavior. Maybe a couple different things. Figure out what those things are, and then use the 6 key steps to build messages around them. Right? Each initiative, each message doesn't need to have all 6. It could just have one as long as it does it well. And in case you want to figure out a better way to do that, there's a workbook. It's free on my website that'll help you apply these ideas. Because it's not random, and it's not luck, and I'm sorry, it's not cats. There's a science behind why people talk and share. There's a science behind why things catch on. And if we can use these insights to craft contagious content, we can get more people walking, and we can create a social movement around it. Thank you very much.